Julie's image was so ingrained in our cultural memory, poised, pristine, that few ever questioned what was happening behind the curtain. But the truth is, Julie Andrews' life was never a musical fantasy. It was marked by painful secrets, overwhelming responsibility, personal heartbreak, and one catastrophic loss that would change her forever. Before the world met Mary Poppins, before the hills came alive with the sound of her voice, Julie Andrews was just Julia Wells, a child trying to survive in a house full of chaos. Absolutely. Here's a continuation of the script, diving into the section titled An Unstable Childhood, Hidden Trauma, and a Life on Stage Before Age 10. It maintains originality, sharp detail, and emotional depth while leaving room to continue into future sections. Before Julie Andrews was winning Oscars and gracing Broadway stages, she was a little girl growing up in post-war England, and life even then was anything but ordinary. Born Julia Elizabeth Wells, she was raised in a house that sounded like it should have been filled with music, but instead echoed with instability and fear. Her mother Barbara was a talented pianist and a performer in her own right, but her personal life was marked by volatility. Julie's biological father, a man she wouldn't even know existed until much later in life, had only a fleeting presence in her early years. Instead, she was raised by her mother and stepfather, Ted Andrews, whose name she eventually took and whose influence was far darker than anyone outside their home would ever suspect. Ted was charming on stage, a vaudeville performer with a booming voice and a magnetic presence. But behind closed doors, he was emotionally abusive, controlling, and unpredictable. Julie would later reveal in her memoir that she often locked her door at night out of fear. There were even incidents of inappropriate behavior that she carried in silence for decades. As a child, she didn't have the vocabulary to define what was happening, but she knew enough to feel unsafe. And yet, in the middle of all this, a broken home, financial hardship, emotional neglect, Julie's voice was emerging as something astonishing, almost otherworldly. Her vocal talent was discovered early by her mother and then trained under the meticulous ear of vocal coach Lillian Stiles Allen. Even in early lessons, it was clear this was no ordinary child singer. Julie could hit notes that professionals twice her age couldn't reach. She wasn't just musical, she was a phenomenon. She began performing in music halls around Britain before she was even 10 years old. These weren't school recitals or talent shows. They were full-blown stage performances, often in dingy theaters filled with cigarette smoke and hardened vaudeville audiences. At just 7 years old, she was already a breadwinner, helping to support her family through grueling performance schedules. And the pressure? Immense. Her voice was more than a gift, it was a survival tool. If she sang well, there'd be food on the table. If she hit those impossible high notes, maybe Ted wouldn't explode that night. Singing became her refuge, her armor, her only sense of control in a world that felt deeply out of balance. This wasn't childhood, it was performance under pressure. And the weight of it would linger in her bones long after the final curtain fell. By her late teens, Julie had already conquered the UK stage. But the real turning point came when she was offered a role in The Boyfriend, a light musical comedy that would become her Broadway debut in 1954. She was just 19 years old and entirely new to America, but her talent was undeniable. Audiences were instantly captivated. 2 years later, she landed the lead role of Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, one of the most demanding parts in musical theater. It required extreme vocal agility and emotional depth, and Julie delivered both flawlessly. She was so good, in fact, that she became irreplaceable on stage. When it came time for the film adaptation in 1964, Hollywood executives decided to cast Audrey Hepburn instead. They believed Julie wasn't bankable enough for the big screen. Worse, they dubbed over Hepburn's singing with a different vocalist, a move that added insult to injury for Julie. She had created that role. She was Eliza Doolittle. And yet, she was left behind. But this apparent rejection turned into fate, because watching her from the wings was none other than Walt Disney. Walt Disney had seen Julie perform live and was absolutely convinced she was the only person who could play Mary Poppins. When he reached out and learned she was pregnant, he said, "That's all right. We'll wait." And he did. Production on Mary Poppins was delayed until Julie was ready, a rare move that spoke volumes about how much Disney believed in her. When Mary Poppins finally premiered in 1964, it became a cultural event. Julie's performance was so enchanting, so effortless, that she won the Academy Award for Best Actress, her very first film role. She also won a BAFTA, a Golden Globe, and became an overnight global icon. The little girl from Surrey was now Hollywood royalty. Just a year later, she starred in The Sound of Music, arguably her most famous role. The film smashed box office records, won 5 Oscars, and became one of the most beloved movies of all time. Her performance as Maria von Trapp, joyful, vulnerable, and grounded, was universally adored. With back-to-back hits, Julie had become a household name. But now came a new challenge, living up to the impossibly high standard the world expected from her. During the whirlwind of her early fame, Julie was married to Tony Walton, a set and costume designer she had known since they were teenagers. They had one daughter, Emma, and for a while, life seemed picture-perfect. But fame creates pressure. Tony's work was primarily in New York, Julie's in Hollywood. Their schedules were brutal, and the distance created a rift. In 1968, after nearly a decade together, they divorced. Julie has often said that Blake taught her how to laugh at herself, something she had struggled with, having been raised in such a tense environment. Their marriage was far from traditional, but it was deeply loving. Julie called him her anchor. When he died in 2010, she was devastated. "The light went out in my life," she said. But even before that loss, another would shake her to her core. In 1997, Julie began experiencing vocal problems. Doctors discovered non-cancerous nodules on her vocal cords, a common condition for singers. She underwent surgery at New York's Mount Sinai Hospital, expecting to make a full recovery. Instead, the procedure went catastrophically wrong. Her vocal cords were irreparably damaged. Her legendary voice, that 4-octave crystalline miracle, was gone. It wasn't just a career setback. It was an identity crisis. Julie had spent her entire life expressing herself through song. "I went into a depression," she later revealed. "I didn't just lose my voice, I lost part of who I was." She filed a malpractice lawsuit and eventually settled, but no amount of legal resolution could undo the damage. She was left with a speaking voice so altered, she once said she barely recognized it as her own. Most people would have stepped away from the spotlight, quietly grieving the loss of their greatest gift. But Julie? She reinvented herself. Alongside her daughter Emma, she began writing children's books, warm, witty stories that reflected the same charm she once brought to the screen. Their Very Fairy Princess series became a bestseller. She also penned 2 deeply personal memoirs, Home and Homework, offering readers a rare, honest glimpse into her life behind the fame. She also became a passionate advocate for vocal health, helping fund research and raise awareness about the risks of vocal surgery. Julie Andrews didn't just survive tragedy, she transcended it. She turned pain into purpose, loss into legacy. Even without her singing voice, she remained a towering figure, a storyteller, an artist, and above all, a symbol of resilience. Her story teaches us that our identity isn't just tied to what we do, it's about who we are when everything else is taken away. She proved that grace under pressure isn't just a performance, it's a choice. And hers was flawless. If this story inspired you, let us know in the comments. What's your favorite Julie Andrews moment and how has she impacted your life?